There are clear signs of donor fatigue. They don't want Pakistan to be a country coming back to them again and again. Province to actually give a provincial urban policy, an example which we hope that other provinces would also follow suit.
What has Punjab done?
Chain in the digital sector that's already established. So you have Indian and Pakistani companies already working together, either virtually or via Dubai, for example, or for that matter, any other country. So you have those partnerships already as to your industrial processing zones, your EPZs, and do the maintenance and just leave,
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Today to speak on the possibility of exports and investments, I'm joined by one of the leading experts and practitioners in the field, Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, Joint Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Vaqar, welcome to InferTalks.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
All right, Dr. Vaqar, let's start our conversation. And at the outset, I must congratulate you for holding a successful Sustainable Development Conference. And I suppose this was perhaps the 25th?
26th, yes.
26th edition.
Yes,
so
yes.
Congratulations on that. And with that, I'd like to start off with our first question. And this first question is about, this very aspect of foreign investments. My last guest, I had Mr. Haroon Sharif, who I did ask him about, very comprehensively in terms of what Pakistan needs to do to get its foreign investments right. But let's speak about the immediate term. In the next 5 to 6 months, where do you really see the landscape in terms of foreign investments in Pakistan?
Thank you very much for having me, first of all. And I must say that next couple of months sort of present quite a bright, I would say, horizon. As you rightly mentioned, we recently concluded the 26th Sustainable Development Conference, which was hosted by STPI. And we received colleagues from over 19 countries who were interested in various aspects of trade and investment in Pakistan and the region, basically. So there's, I would say, decent investor interest returning, of course, due to the recent measures which have been taken, most notably, of course, on the investment side, you have this one window available in the form of SIFC. On the trade side, of course, we have managed to reduce at least the logistics costs, some part of logistics costs through Pakistan's single window initiative. And then, of course, there's a large Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI program, which is being implemented by the federal government along with the provincial boards of investments as well. So with this, of course, we are seeing a reduction in some trade and investment costs, which, of course, should lure the domestic as well as the foreign investor. I will, of course, qualify my answer by saying that investor interest is also a function of overall macroeconomic stability in the country. And I'm very encouraged to note that at least some stability can now be exhibited, given that we recently had an IMF mission meeting in which there was a staff level agreement. And now we are hearing that on the 7th of December, the board is going to approve the next tranche and, of course, the way forward of the program as well. This, as you know, has given a very positive sentiment to the market. You have seen Pakistan Stock Exchange doing very well. A rupee dollar parity sort of having some stability now. Of course, not that Pakistan is trying to control the parity. We are determined to keep a fair market value of the currency. But all this essentially is giving good news to the foreign investor, to the local investor, that Pakistan is walking the path committed with the IMF and our development partners.
But in terms of numbers, where do you really see the picture going in the next 5 to 6 months?
Yes. So I think
like in terms of scale of foreign investment.
Yes. So I think the pledges, or at least the expected numbers which are being quoted to us, I would say that they are still fluid. Of course, there is interest of the Gulf countries in the refining sector. There's a number associated with it. And people continue to tell me whether we should be saying this this number out loud, given that the numbers around CPEC remained so fluid until the very end. Then, of course, you have the mining sector, investor interest, of course, coming. There's a number attached to that as well, If I could actually talk about the potential of these investments in the next 2 to 3 years is well beyond $20 billion US. But the fact is that, of course, we need to do a lot of homework to actually see that how much of this $20 billion, which is sort of the potential part of those inflows which could take place in the next 2 years, how much of that can be received as early as possible, given that we want to augment our foreign exchange reserves. And with the augmentation, of course, the industry will be relieved because we'll be able to sort of cushion our imports, and those imports are required by our exporting industries as well.
And do you think there's some element of, you mostly hear it when it comes to, money that is coming in or flowing in with respect to development aid, whether there's capacity available to absorb that sum of money. Does it also go with foreign investments as well? That you really need to have some form of capacity in place in order to, absorb that amount of foreign investment?
Absolutely.
Does that also stand true for foreign investments?
Absolutely. This is a very good question, actually. So the fact that you have to sort of be well positioned to absorb investment, grant, loan, development loan, for example.
Or even sovereign wealth funds?
Absolutely. And it depends on the maturity of the sector. So if you ask me today to, let's say, absorb a couple of let's say $1 million in my digital sector, that shouldn't be a problem. I have a very mature digital sector, tech sector, textile as well, another sector which is far mature than many of its peers, But when it comes to several other sectors, like...
Could you point out like a few examples?
We are recently talking about corporate agriculture, green agriculture, for example, the use of AI in agriculture. We are talking about safe mining. We are also talking about, even if I can take the example of renewable energy as well, whether we are well positioned or not, and whether the interests of those who will be investing in the energy sector, will those interests materialize or not? I think there's going to be a trajectory before we sort of bring sector-specific reforms in these sectors and some of the new emerging sectors on the back of AI before we can absorb the investment.
But what would we really need in order to ensure that we can absorb money in those sectors? Like, what would be the 4 to 5 things that each sector would need to do to make sure that investments can flow in?
So 3 important things. First is having a very conducive regulatory environment for these sectors. And by conducive, I mean regulatory environment which is also available in our competitor countries. So if, for example, somebody wants to bring in a variety of, let's say, agriculture seed in the country, or maybe agriculture intermediate goods, and we overly regulate it, then you are stifling the investment in agriculture. We have seen it with GMOs, for example. So what to regulate, how to regulate, when to regulate is the first part. Don't quickly stifle that sector before it matures, The second part is that of HR. If I have to invest a couple of $1 billion in Balochistan, do I have enough project managers, project directors, senior engineers willing to spend time in Balochistan, willing to remain in Balochistan? I'm just giving Balochistan as an example.
Right.
Even we face the issue of lack of skilled HR in many parts of Punjab, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Islamabad even. I have met investors who have already invested in the Special Technology Zone Authority provisions. There are, of course, zones which are available to the investors, and now face HR issues, So having the availability of skilled HR, attracting them to, of course, these new sectors, retaining them in those sectors is the main thing. And my third and final pick would be longer-term certainty of policies within these sectors. So if we have to continuously change, let's say, the taxation and tariff environment faced by tech sector, energy sector, agriculture sector, I cannot expect longer-term investment because a longer-term investor has to do some feasibility study of 10, 20 years, and they have to lock in their costs, and they can't do it unless I change my tax tariff or let's say even subsidy structure, so often.
Right. And so before I come to my next question, and this is about this very same fact, do policymakers or people like you really wargame about these situations that, we're expecting foreign investments in these 5 sectors in next few years? And these are the problems that we need to take care of. And then I take my boxes and probably, test those parameters that I've set out, even for a foreign investment that might come in, and will not have to face those issues when those parameters are actually laid down practically.
Yeah, I think when it comes to prioritizing these issues, I think that lately we have seen quite a bit of traction in the policy corridors. And there's a lot of seriousness that Pakistan is a large country, really large domestic demand, huge population to serve, the position in the region, of course, and it doesn't reflect good if you have had over 22 programs with the IMF, you can't, of course, have investors or even your, as I was saying, good HR relating to sort of themselves relating to this country when you have this sort of relationship with the fund or with your lenders, So we are really seeing a lot of seriousness on putting at least 2 or 3 things in place and then walking that path. One, of course, is our commitments with the IMF. We don't want to walk away from those commitments. And you rightly used the word about wargaming. That is one issue on which there's a lot going on. And in every sector, may it be taxation, energy, privatization, there's a lot of thinking going on how we are going to deliver our promises with the fund, because delivering our promise with the fund unlocks a lot of investment by other multilateral and bilateral development partners of Pakistan. Second is in the investment space, the need to have something like SIFC was always there, never done, of course, but now the fact that you have come forward and here is a window for local and foreign investors to for them to talk with. If they are facing regulatory issues, if they are facing issues related to, let's say, taxation, entry issues, barriers to entry, for example, here is this window, and it sort of cuts through the red tape. It helps you to sort of walk through in different provinces. What the business people used to say, that if we are working in Punjab, we have a different set of problems in Sindh, for example. So SIFC and initiatives like Pakistan Single Window even, all of them are pointing towards that direction, where those problems which you are facing with multiple layers of bureaucracy are sailed through. And SIFC, as you would know, is also meeting very regularly, and there's a very rigorous follow-up on that.
All right, Dr. Vaqar, now let me come to my next question. And this is certainly awkward for you because, of course, you are someone who's trained as an economist. But let me ask you this. How indispensable or what kind of political environment do you think is indispensable to invite and retain foreign investments?
You see, colleagues in the investment space that I have met with, in people who really, even beyond investment space, people who are trading or want to trade with Pakistan, they attach a lot of value with the holding of elections, timely holding of elections in this country. And why? Naturally so, because the next government will come in, they'll give a 5-year program that what do they want to do in their tenure. And of course, there'll be some sector-specific announcements as well, that what are their sector priorities as well, what will be their relationship with the fund. That is what the traders and the investors and the local startups, even they want to see. And your question is very important, that even the development partners who are going to lend to Pakistan, many of them, they would be looking at the start of 2024 very carefully in terms of how the elections are held, how does the new setup, whatever that may be, conduct itself in the first 100 days, because they set the tone. And then about 3 months later, 3 to 4 months later, the new elected setup will be giving their first federal budget, which our business community will be looking at very carefully.
But even if we're speaking about lenders, what are some of their biggest concerns, when it comes to the political environment itself? I mean, apart from the elections itself, I'm sure when viewers are actually watching this, I think they're far more wiser. We can't ridicule their judgment either. But they might say, here are other few things that also really count and matter. Speaking on that, what are those few things that really do concern, lenders also? You don't have to spill the beans on the details or anything like that, but like very sporadically or very superficially, what are some of those concerns that are raised by lenders also when it comes to
Yeah. So 2 or 3 things. One is that there are clear signs of donor fatigue. They don't want Pakistan to be a country coming back to them again and again.
Why is it? Because they think, we're politically too unstable. There's too much happening at the political landscape. There's need to, sort of lower the temperatures, create that kind of environment which sort of makes it easier even for lenders to have that predictability in terms of, maturing or perhaps seeing their programs be more successful.
I think your last point is important. If you are posted in Pakistan as, for example, the head of some large lending body or multilateral body, at the end of your 3 years, you have to demonstrate that the needle has moved. I have made some progress in energy, in clean drinking water, in the provision of, let's say, sanitation, nutrition, and other indicators, the sustainable development goals and the indicators are moving, But if they aren't moving, yes, it reflects bad on the country, but it also reflects bad on the person who took a risk on you, which is the lender in this case, So yes, you're right. There is an urgency. They want to help us move forward, But the point on donor fatigue was that their boards, the boards of these institutions who lend to us, the multilateral institutions, there's a clear fatigue over there. When we go to them, they would say that, look, you came to us 2 decades ago asking for the same thing and for the same purpose. And we really want a good diagnostic that what happened during these 2 decades, that our investments haven't worked, our lending hasn't worked, and you are burdened with more debt that you owe to us, basically. This is even what our friendly countries are telling us, that you have to do maybe a couple of important reforms that don't keep on burdening you. You are just piling debt at the moment, There are countries helping you with that debt, but you can't do that. And rollovers are certainly not one answer. The second thing that these donors and development partners get frustrated about is the frequent turnover of development administration. So what they tell us is that it's not a big deal that ministers come and go. They are used to this in other countries as well. But with the going of ministers or the civil servants within the same government, the policies should not change. The policy, if it has been given by party A or party B, for example, should remain the same, even if the minister changes or the civil servant changes.
With a few changes here and there.
That's right.
But over here, what we've seen is when heads roll, policies drastically change.
and the urgency to implement those policies changes. The dedication and devotion which one was taking forward, that also changes. And I must say that the civil service turnover in Pakistan is something which we don't see in the peer economies. You don't see federal secretaries and provincial secretaries changing every 3, 4, 7 months in other countries. This is just not good practice. There's a learning curve which every head of the institution requires to implement their vision, you know. And maybe the last point around the frustration that donors sort of express, you know, is also around the aid coordination architecture. Pakistan should not be asking, let's say if you have asked 1 or 2 donors for education, you shouldn't go around asking 10 different donors for the same sector as well. There would be country-specific expertise that what is it that I can learn from Japan? I should ask Japan for the same thing. What is it that I can learn from, let's say, Scandinavian partners, you know? I should engage them in those sectors. Here, what we are saying is that if the government is going on, let's say, a COP meeting next month in Dubai, and there's a large focus on climate change and floods, all the donors are being requested or steered towards that direction, you know. And this, if you pick up their work plans, you know, there's clear duplication, you know. All the donors would be providing the same training to the civil service, the same capacity building, you know, the same seminars, the same conferences. I think it's time for action, and that'll only come if our aid coordination mechanism at the entity called Economic Affairs Division, EAD, improves.
All right. And now another point about reforms, and this has to do, again, has to deal with the political side of it as well. Let me rope in your analysis or your insight. We've mostly seen over here a lot of stress taking place on, you know, carrying out a lot of economic reforms. But if I were to perhaps pick your mind on taking a different approach, a more holistic approach, where both economic and political reforms can be carried out in a similar fashion to, let's say, what 25 years ago a country like Indonesia did, and, you know, that sort of set it on an entirely different trajectory from where it is now, exactly from where it started 25 years ago. What kind of promise could such kind of reforms hold for Pakistan's future? Because frankly, you know, we've spoken about, you know, the issue of, you know, unemployment in our previous conversations, you know, rising population and everything. Why do you think, and how do you think, reforms in these 2 areas can really be useful in ensuring that there's more towards stability than, you know, ending up with temporary solutions?
Yeah. So I think you're very right. The solution matrix is now fairly known. You take any structural problem, the solution matrix is there, the policies are there, you know. And as I said, it's the implementation arm that now needs to work, you know. So a couple of things which are on the way, I'd say, and I hope that they materialize very quickly. One is that there's thinking now, a lot of thinking which hopefully will materialize soon, that the economic reform decision-making, the way it currently stands, is very fragmented. So we really need to sort of consolidate that. That can take several forms. You could merge these ministries, economic ministries. For example, many countries have a single ministry for industry, commerce, and agriculture, you know. You don't need three separate decision-making places, you know. And there'd be other examples as well, merging, let's say, finance, economic affairs division, planning commission, privatization commission, whatever the way the government feels. But what the examples from Indonesia, and if I can include Malaysia as well, what they tell us is that ending this fragmentation in economic decision-making is a low-hanging fruit, and it has large dividends. The other is that these ministries or forums of processing economic decisions submit recommendations to high-level forums. In our case, those forums are called National Economic Council, ECNIC, and of course other forums. They need to be meeting more frequently. You cannot say that the NEC will only meet a couple of days prior to federal budget. No, some of the decisions are fairly important. So there's some thinking going on now in strengthening these forums of NEC, ECNIC, ECC, Economic Coordination Committee, having greater provincial participation as well, more frequent provincial participation as well. The other part is, and this is where I think the federal governments would have to come in, but of course political leadership will have to guide, that is to complete the devolution process. So whatever you are doing at the federal level, the fruits need to trickle down really to a tehsil level, to a village council level, and they will only happen if the devolution in letter and spirit is actually seen. So
it's sad that you mentioned this, because from my own living experience, I don't think, because I myself actually come from a small town of District Badin, I can recall that back then, council members actually had a lot of power, particularly in their first term, in terms of deciding what projects that they really wanted to do. They had liberty to, to direct those funds in those places also. But now, even the local councils that we've seen that have existed under provincial governments do not even allow that kind of liberty. And there's no level of transparency towards what end of development is really taking place, how is it being channelized, etc. And there's hardly any bit of public involved, even through those local councils in the first place. So there's certainly a lot need to be fixed, and the devolution has not really taken place. Isn't that so unfortunate?
That's right. That's right. And I'm glad that there is realization now that things can't go on like this. Why? Because people have seen sort of reduced chances or opportunities of social mobility, and people have started moving to large cities. The large cities couldn't absorb them. Your city infrastructure is collapsing. So eventually, unless public service delivery improves at a local level, and they see that social contract coming, they won't be able to sustain themselves in those cities with weak municipal services, absolutely missing solid waste management, and lack of clean drinking water. These are very basic things we're talking about.
Generation of revenue itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. So while at a federal level one sees a commitment to transfer the resources to the province, there is no constitutional binding at the provincial level to then transfer those provinces to district and tehsil and then to the council level, That is one. The second is that you even have the other track where you end up giving funds to MNAs and MPAs who would be directly be involved in, let's say, projects or schemes. But even through that channel, nothing sort of reaches those elected local governments or their council members per se, where the council committee could make that decision.
Absolutely. Because to me, I suppose it has to be taken independently by the councils themselves.
Yes.
You have to sort of remove the provincial legislators, because they sort of, I must admit, sort of spoil the recipe itself for local development, because they would want to serve it purely as part of their political economy when we speak of provincial legislators. And now my next question is, and let me ask a very controversial question without naming names. Do provincial governments really have to be handheld by different powers who we really know who that can be, to sort of make them realize, okay, this is what you really need to do in order to, get the development going? Or perhaps at least political parties can sort of, pull their socks up and say, no, we have to really do this for our own constituency, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with local constituencies. We're dealing with local, electorates. No one has to come and sort of tell us what we have to do instead. That is our primary job, which should have been done by our own selves. And we should have been there for the public in the first place. Do you think political parties that are major political parties can at least now set in that realization and do that thing by themselves instead, someone else coming in and telling them that's what you have to do?
Yes. So I think there are scanty examples, I would say. What you're saying should have been done. It should have been common sense. But given that political parties have seen turbulence within their party cadres in the past decade or so, their relationship with stakeholders external to their parties has also been bumpy, of course, which sort of takes away your attention from your core business, your mandate for which you have been elected into the office, But
the problem is all of them do claim that, our electorate has not disappeared. We're connected with our voters.
Yes.
So at least for their sake, could not they sort of, do the same thing?
Yes. So 2 or 3 things have happened. Number one, the electorate has become smarter, right? Now, of course, the voter, if they were demanding politely previously, now they are they are demanding maybe sort of vigorously, or at some places very violently. So people have to respond to that, and otherwise you won't be able to go back to your constituency next time. It becomes difficult, morally difficult to go back. The other thing is that even I would say in most mainstream parties, we are seeing reformists come up, if not come up in the hierarchy, at least being more vocal. And media and social media and platforms such as yours, they have played a very significant role in giving a voice to those reformists within those political parties. We have seen that in case of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We have in the administrative or police or other reforms which took place after 2013. We saw this in, for example, the health sector in Sindh, where, of course, you had some reform-minded people who were able to do it. We have seen this, for example, in education sector of Punjab, that some reforms have come about. But I think more needs to be done. These reform-minded people have to come forward a little further. One unfortunate part that has happened is the shrinking space for civil society organizations who have been subjected to large sort of almost stifling regulation. And it was these civil society organizations, non-profits, NGOs who used to provide or sort of amplify the voice of those reformers within those parties, or the opposition when these parties were in opposition, So that social accountability effort also has to be increased.
All right, Dr. Vaqar, now let me come to my next question, and this is primarily about this ongoing population bomb, if I must say, because Pakistan's population is on the rise. And in the next 2 decades, we're expecting the population to go somewhere about 440 million people. You've recently held this Food Security Expo. What are your thoughts? How could we sort of improve Pakistan's food basket towards this end?
Yes. So I think you're right. Population, of course, has been on the rise. There is a agriculture productivity issue that we have to deal with in the country. And in many parts of the world from where we import food, even they are challenged as well. Gulf countries have ran their own simulations where they are expecting that under some scenarios of climate change, there could be global food shortages. They are preparing for that, And that's the kind of lens that Pakistan is also keeping, that if, for example, due to the impacts of climate change, disasters, floods, for example, and our structural problems in agriculture, if our agricultural productivity remains depressed, what are those 2 or 3 things that we basically need to do? So, first point is that there's a lot of R&D which is now being promoted by our local research institutions, but also with help from partners such as China, bringing in climate resilient seeds, bringing in seeds which sort of lend you higher yield, improving practices, mechanization. That is an area that continues to be I think the government is doing well on that. You have seen increase of some crops on the back of decent weather conditions as well, decent support price, which is the second thing. The regulatory environment, the credit, timely availability of credit, timely availability of inputs for our farmers is the second thing that we need to focus on. And despite of the fact that we're under a fund program, we have tried to sort of preserve the support as much as we can for the farming community. It is because of this indigenous, of course, farming sector that Pakistan has been saved from even worse balance of payments crises at many times. For example, during COVID times, the fact that you were growing your own food, at least able to meet some part of your local needs, that you were saved. Many of the countries who actually faced much worse balance of payments crisis was because they were large food importers. Pakistan also is a food importer now. The third aspect here is agriculture trade. And that is an area where we are struggling.
And why is that?
Yes.
I'm sure you must have had conversations with people in the agricultural business.
Yes.
Why is that the case?
So countries tend to cushion and smooth out their food price inflation if they are able to trade with neighbors. So if you have seasonal demand patterns, in the past what used to happen was that you were trading with India and India was trading with you. Season, for example, finished over here and ended over there. You had supplies going from here to there and then vice versa as well.
So there was more of a complementing factor over there?
Yes. There was a vibrant Punjab trade in agriculture sector, something which we don't see anymore, due to which you have seen that bringing down food prices has been a challenge. Then, of course, Afghanistan, of course, we receive fruits, vegetables, a lot of other agriculture items from there, and we also supply to them. But over there as well, the trade outlook isn't sort of very promising, I'm sorry to say. And a lot needs to be done on the diplomatic front to improve the trade relations. But the only point I want to make is that not having trade in agriculture with neighbors, as is done in other regions, deprives you of a lot of inputs that have to go into the agriculture, and your buyers and sellers of output, which the agriculture has to provide. And the skewed incentives always remain, and you won't be able to stop in the end when the output is lying around. You have stopped the trade. Ultimately, there would be some black sheeps who would find out the way to smuggle that output. So you often hear that you have put export controls, but still, for example, there would be a market for it somewhere. It happens. So I think the Ministry of National Food Security and Research has put in place an agriculture transformation plan. One just hopes that there's urgency to implement that plan, and you need a lot of provincial support in that, because agriculture is a provincial subject.
But now, before I come to my next question on exports and trade, let me ask you a very serious question, and this is about how we've seen different cities develop so far. It's not just about big cities like Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, even let me include cities like Rawalpindi and Peshawar as well. But even when we look at smaller cities also, like Multan, Hyderabad, and others, even Faisalabad, they're sort of expanding on the margins, with the ongoing urban sprawl. But then at the same time, what we see is, more emphasis on horizontal form of development than, moving towards, building high rises or multi-story buildings. I remember when I was growing up, I used to see that the Karachi's influence sort of affected Hyderabad, and you would see, small story buildings over there, apartment-like construction, and most people lived in apartments instead of, having those small houses, which we mostly would find in other cities. Don't you think we need to sort of encourage that form of development in other cities, in other areas, which are even expanding on the margins of the already established cities?
Absolutely, and we are late in coming. So we have delayed this reform, urban sector reform, for some time. And as I was telling you in the beginning, that this is precisely why you see the youth and, of course, working age population migrating to cities which can't accommodate them, and then they grow more frustrated once they're over here. To your question, high rise, I think 3 of the provinces didn't have the laws to allow the high rise. It's only after the push given by the previous government.
And what were these 3 provinces?
So, for example, KP, Balochistan, they didn't have these laws, Even Punjab received a push in the last government when there was a large focus on building houses, small houses,
But who do you fix the responsibility on? Was it the legislators? Were it the governments? Were it the bureaucrats that never saw it coming? Who do you fix the responsibility on for not coming up with those policies in a timely manner?
I think all of us who just not only didn't see this coming, that the population was increasing, there was a housing deficit, where will you sort of put them? And we saw that, we missed seeing that business opportunity as well, that with that construction will come the growth of those allied industries, those construction material industries, which over time would become exporters of goods and services. We missed that business opportunity as well. But yes, the realization is there now, and KP has become the first province to actually give a provincial urban policy, an example which we hope that other provinces will also follow suit.
What has Punjab done towards this end so far?
Yes, so Punjab is generally operating through those existing laws which were there. But of course, the laws, while they of course provide you with the main rules of the game, the policy would sort of give the incentive structure for what goes in, let's say, improving physical infrastructure, bringing investment in housing, high rises, investment in commercial centers, business hubs, to the extent of improving walkability in your cities, And, your question, and the reason that it's important is that it links to my subject, and that's commerce. Commerce takes place in cities. If I don't have city spaces which can accommodate domestic commerce, probably, you won't have exchange of goods and services. And it is that particular reason, where due to which, of course, your logistics costs have remained too high. We often talk, connecting myself with the previous question, you were talking about agriculture sector reform. We note the deficit of storage and warehousing, cold storage in case of agriculture and livestock, and these had to be, of course, placed at places of domestic commerce hubs, but we couldn't accommodate them, And it is only now that this realization has come that we have missed the bandwagon, and if we have to become leading exporters of manufactured goods, of agriculture goods, these cities have to create those spaces, basically, because they are the logistic nodes going forward,
But the other question that, in extension to this, why I wanted to ask is because, let's be honest, our bureaucracies have been extremely lethargic. They don't realize if we keep on having this urban sprawl outside on the margins of the cities, the food basket will eventually shrink. And once when it shrinks, you're likely to... your dependence on food imports is likely to skyrocket. Why is it that governments really need to, even at the local level, take this more seriously?
No, you're right. And, bureaucracies would evaluate and sign off, Your question is more pertinent for the political leadership. It's only when the political leadership attaches more importance to this subject that reform happens, So you would have, let's say, a progressive chief minister of Punjab, and you would see 2 or 3 cities in Punjab, like maybe Lahore, Faisalabad, Multan, see the kind of development that many other cities in Pakistan haven't seen. I'm sure that the problems exist, Then you would, let's say, have a prime minister who would have weekly meetings with the housing authority, just to see that where are my housing development targets. You would have a prime minister who would say that, okay, housing is there, physical infrastructure of cities is there, where's the energy? And then they would attach importance to energy. So I believe that this is a question which is so important for the political leadership at the federal and the 4 provincial chief ministers. They have to drive it, and the bureaucracies under them fall in the line. They'll sign off, just because every week there's going to be a follow-up meeting that what happened to, let's say, like we have seen in case of KP, that it was the chief minister who was following every week for the master plans of the cities, which had not been given since more than 75 years. There were no master plans for large cities like Peshawar, Mardan, Abbottabad, and you've only seen them coming in the past 2 years.
That's interesting. Now, Dr. Vaqar, let me come to this important subject of exports. We see so much emphasis, on national media, in think tank seminars and everywhere about connectivity and all those things related to it. But frankly, let's break down this very mysterious thing about exports. Let's say, if there's any budding businessman or a young trader that wants to enter the profession, or any budding trader that wants to enter the profession, what is it that they really need to do? What are the 5 major steps that they really need to do in order to get into the export business?
Yes. So I think the registration processes, the entry into the market, even the trading procedures, they have been fairly facilitated by Pakistan Single Window and the regulators, So entry in terms of registration and initiating your business isn't very difficult now. And you even, if in most sectors, you don't even need to go to the offices, Your brokers would do that, or most of the stuff can also be done online as well. I think the navigation part actually comes when you have kicked off or when you are scaling up your product or the service, That's when you get to face the tax authorities, I won't say face, you of course learn how to sort of comply with the taxation procedures. You learn how to comply with sector-specific regulations, But let me tell you that in our case, we have tried to really cut down on the number of taxes faced by the startups, the number of regulations faced by startup companies, even those who are at a scale-up stage, and even easing their access to credit. So yes, credit in foreign currency denomination may be a problem, but credit in PKR should be easier. There are problems related to foreign currency payments. Yes, those who want to send money outside of Pakistan to their vendors, that is something where constraints are there. But startups wishing to service the local demand and then growing up organically and becoming an exporter, that is not hard at this moment. You even have some very large companies, who are in fact content supplying to the local demand. We have to force them to actually say that, look, there's a large export demand as well out there, But it's a good time to be a startup, given that there's space in the market, there's credit availability, there's a taxation regime which favors the startups in most sectors.
And so, Dr. Vaqar, let's speak of the region of Central Asia itself. We've seen some companies like TCS, even NLC, that have tried carrying out their own feasibility, I must say, shipments so far in terms of exporting goods in the region. If there are some exporters that might want to, even in the food business, that might want to, export their products, what is it that they would really need to do in order to, get their products to these markets?
First is to produce those products competitively. What I have seen trading with our Western side is that there's a lot of competition. You would need to produce consistently at a lower cost. That's the first thing. You will find the market. If you're able to maintain production at a lower cost, you'll find the market. Our products reach Central Asia with or without the recent reforms. The recent reforms are very encouraging. The adoption of TIR convention, which facilitates our cargo, for example, it's very important. But we then also have air cargo facility, for example. We have seen pharmaceutical companies going via Turkey to the CIS countries.
But now we have direct flights all the way to Kazakhstan as well.
Absolutely. So I don't see physical connectivity or connectivity via multimodal transport being a problem. The issue is about correctly diagnosing the demand in those markets.
And so how could that be done?
Yes. So this is where the role of chambers of commerce comes in. You need very proactive business associations. They need to come out of their comfort zone. Up till now, what I have seen, for example, in Dushanbe, for example, if you find Pakistani medicine or Pakistani manufactured pharmaceutical items, which are a norm now after COVID, we have been supplying to them, it's because of the efforts of one or two individuals. And only those companies have penetrated in Tajikistan,
So there hasn't been like a structural approach to encouraging that kind of exports.
That's what I meant. And we have hundreds of pharmaceutical firms who could facilitate, if only their sector associations are proactive in finding the demand spots abroad and then facilitating the entry of, for example, pharma startups, or let's say agri startups. Their networking costs, their information costs would get reduced if the chambers of commerce help with that. The government can also help when it comes to those products where certifications are required. Government could share the cost of testing and getting the certifications done.
Mm-hmm. And sir, now let me speak about the very important topic, probably the elephant in the room, and you did touch on that as well, and that is doing trade with our neighbors. And I so want to pick your brains on the possibility of bilateral trade between India and Pakistan. We've seen so many figures being thrown up on the potential to which, the bilateral trade can really be taken to, but we haven't seen a lot of progress, and there are certainly valid reasons why progress has been, too little or either too late coming towards that end. And primarily it has been mostly been because of a couple of issues. One is that of the bilateral dispute of Kashmir. And on the other hand, we've mostly seen, this apprehension that perhaps, bilateral trade between India and Pakistan could aggravate Pakistan's existing current account deficit or, its trade deficit when it might come to India itself. What could really be done to sort of make a progress towards the end of bringing about some kind of a resumption of bilateral trade or connectivity between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, and with also respect to the fact that, how do you allay Pakistan's own fiscal concern in the process?
Yes. So we basically started by studying India's trade relations with its other neighbors and what we learn from the experience of Bangladesh-India trade, Sri Lanka-India trade, China-India trade. What we learn is maybe two or three things. One is that economically smaller countries, in this case Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, tend to gain more by trading with a larger partner. It's the same way your industry gets to gain when you are trading with China, which is a much larger partner. Import savings, you tend to get cheaper inputs for your industry under an FTA program. You have an FTA with China, it reduces my input costs. I'm able to import more, something that I may have imported from Europe, It comes in much more cheaply from China, although it doesn't come, most of the industrial inputs don't come through the land route. They come through a much longer route, but still they come in cheap. And this is a logic that applies to India-Pakistan trade as well. Yes, one would most of the trade literature suggests that both countries should sort of insulate trade from politics, but the smaller country gets to gain more. Import savings, I told you about the food price inflation that could be mitigated if agriculture trade with India is normalized. Of course, you have B2B meetings which used to take place until about 2015 maybe, and you had those partnerships between Sialkot and Amritsar and Ludhiana and Haryana, where you had the sports industry, the surgical industry, the hosiery industry of the Golden Triangle interacting with their counterparts in Punjab and beyond. But we need to take a much broader view of trade, India-Pakistan trade now, and go beyond the trade in goods. So you have a large services sector trade, which is really awaiting.
Could you highlight a few areas, please?
Yes. So the iron foundry, the steel mills, for example, that you set up in your special economic zones, for example, and end up inviting expensive engineers to install them, to repair them, to maintain them from North America, from the European countries, giving the same maintenance contract to much cheaper engineering firms just across the neighbor is something which we used to have until 2015. You had Indian engineers who used to come to the industrial areas, to your industrial processing zones, your EPZs, and do the maintenance and just leave, And engineering services is that basic level of service that my industry would require every day, every year to maintain themselves,
And could something also be done, in other areas like, say, the IT sector or
yes.
other areas? Also,
so that's where
you have to have very little, even physical presence to get the job done.
Exactly. So that's where I was coming at. That if you look at the value chain in the digital sector, that's already established. So you have Indian and Pakistani companies already working together, either virtually or via Dubai, for example, or for that matter, any other country. So you have those partnerships already well established, Within the services sector is that important area that most of your multinational companies operating on both sides of the border are saying that we end up incurring heavy costs just because our intermediate products cannot flow. So if, for example, there's a multinational company here and it wants to import its intermediate product over there, which becomes an output ultimately, of course, that can't happen, and we are missing out on the modern sort of aspects of trade. During COVID's time, we saw that both countries had to cooperate and learn from each other on the health and safety protocols that used to go into food trade, and there was a SAARC health ministers meeting which was also convened back then. We have a SAARC food bank initiative which is really awaiting to be reinvigorated, So, I have no doubt in my mind that eventually this has to happen,
Exactly. That's the point. Eventually it has to happen. But the problem is, as you just rightly pointed out, we need to politically insulate some of the areas like trade, sports, and so many other areas from politics. The problem is, some might say that, government in India right now is perhaps not too willing to make progress towards those particular ends. And when I say that, one recent example that does come to mind is, when Pakistani fans or even other people that would have wanted to go and, witness the World Cup in India were not provided visas well ahead in time. And even despite the fact, Pakistan was not even part of the qualifiers either, or the fact that, Pakistan played almost all its 10 matches and fans were not provided visas in time. What do you really have to say to the Indian government on the other side, the kind of change of attitude that they might also need to show to sort of, let those developments take place in areas of trade, sports, entertainment, in other areas that can be, kept away from the unwanted politics?
Yeah. So in most of our track 2 meetings, this is what we have suggested, that India being an economically bigger country in the SAARC region needs to display that level of game where, of course, they can keep the neighbors engaged and move towards a more conducive trade and investment cooperation arrangement, largely because of the threats that region faces as a whole. We are facing a climate threat. We are facing issues related to, of course, I'm sure in most of the social sectors, we have issues where we can learn from. But the fact is that if you look at India, they have problems of their own. So politically, of course, India is still not there where you see that level of maturity, which, for example, Nepal demands, that the way India treats a landlocked country like Nepal, or Bhutan, for example, for that matter, So that level of political maturity is still not there. And of course, it's a large democracy. So it may be slow in coming. And I'm sure this may be the case in many other countries. The question again comes back to me, whether I am going to continue to wait to promote my business interests, whether I'm going to continue to promote, to wait that a level of that political maturity should come in my neighbor, on both sides, maybe in Delhi and Kabul, or I can be smarter enough to produce some trade simulations which allow me to sort of penetrate on both sides of my neighborhood, keeping in view that other things may not change in the short term. And we have seen countries move forward with this kind of arrangement: China, Taiwan, China, India, North Korea, South Korea, Argentina, Brazil example, Israel-Arab trade relations, for example. So we have seen economies move forward with the flow of goods and services, keeping their political tensions as they are, And that is what I think Pakistan has to see: its own interest, business interest, economic interest, and once that happens, once you start penetrating, your firms become smarter in other markets, the other things follow. The rest of the interests follow, basically.
Dr. Vaqar, on this note, let's conclude our conversation on the very hope that, there's some hope and there's some progress actually made in all these areas that we've discussed so far.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for staying with us through this conversation with Dr. Vaqar Ahmed on InferTalks. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content to show your support. And if you'd like to stay informed on upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.